Dan, what's up, man? Welcome to Dad Edge.
Hey, Larry, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, you're welcome, man. Today's topic, man, it's you want to hear something really, really fascinating?
Yes.
So we've talked about this topic, I would say out of 700 shows, we've talked about this topic 10 times, where we've had a
Mhm.
guest that has talked about like the struggles and everything going on with it. But here's the fascinating thing. The shows we've done on pornography are always the most downloaded. They're always at the top. It's usually porn.
Mhm.
It's usually marriage, communication, intimacy. Those are the ones that get a lot of downloads, but porn is always at the top. But here's the funny thing. It gets the least amount of social engagement.
Oh, wow. Of course.
So a lot of
Makes
people,
sense.
right? A lot of people see it, but they're like, I don't want, I'll listen to it. I don't want to like it though. Right. Or I don't want to
Yeah.
comment. I don't want people to know I listen to this. But you know what? I think the more we make this topic less and less taboo, the more we can have open conversations around it, around not having the shame and guilt that's associated with it. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
You're spot on. Yeah. Well, I admire you for being willing to talk about this topic. I mean, not many people, it's not a topic, that a lot of people talk about. So, just admire you for having the courage to do it.
I've never met a man to date who hasn't struggled with this either currently or at some point in their life. It just is what it is. And now
Yep.
it's more accessible than ever. So let's dive right in and let's talk about, well, first of all, how were you brought up? Did that have anything to do with your habits around the topic?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think I had the best childhood ever, to be honest. Both my brother and I have amazing parents. We really couldn't ask for more loving and supportive parents. Grew up in a Christian home, went to church, was heavily involved in the youth group. So I think I had about as good a childhood as anyone could ask for. So, no complaints there. It was about as good as it could be. Um, I think I'm pretty typical. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think my story is fairly typical where, I Christian household and growing up and, as you get a little bit older, you start to notice some of those scenes on TV and in the movies. And, you really, those sex scenes, you really start to notice some really exciting feelings going on. And you want more of that, as you get older. And then probably like so many other guys too, I got to junior high and was over at a friend's house one day and he showed me pornography on his computer. And that was the first time I'd really seen something like that. And I was just hooked. I just wanted more. Just the feelings that I experienced when I was looking at that. I was just like, give me more of that. So, nothing really unusual, I don't think. And, so I grew up, in the 80s and 90s. And I remember when we first got internet in the house. And then, kind of discovered how to get pornography in the house. And so in my teenage years, I started to get hooked on it, in my house, still living at home in high school. And, you know, at that point I was just hooked.
How old are you?
I'm 38.
Okay.
I was born in 82.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So we're not too far off in age. I'm curious though, just out of curiosity, I don't remember anything being on computers like when I was younger, but then again, I've got about 7 years on you. What was the computer that you saw the first visualization?
So, well, the first time was at my friend's house in junior high. I mean, it was just so back then. I think they had a really nice computer. I think it was a Sony. I don't know if you remember those Sony computers. Those were like top of the line, um, and it was probably available before that, but that was the first time I had seen it. And then we got a computer, and it was probably a little bit of time after we ended up getting the internet, but. Yeah, I got hooked and was able to find some ways to download images and videos and
Okay.
things
Yeah.
like that.
I'm just curious because I didn't know if you were going to say the same thing I did, which is the first time I ever saw any type of like nudity or anything on a computer. It was playing the game Leisure Suit Larry. I don't know if you remember that
I
game,
I
but
know that game. I know that game. Unfortunately, I
yeah,
do.
dude, there was only one. I think that there was like only one like part of the game where like this woman who's a cartoon character became topless. But like I remember like we just tried everything we could to constantly get back to that particular
Yeah.
image over and over and over again. Like that was like the
Yeah.
whole goal of I don't even remember what the game was about, but yeah.
Well, and
Uh,
so I mean, I'm like incriminating myself here, but the other thing that we would that I did, and I remember this now, is so like you'd have the cable box on top, and you'd go to like the highest channel on the cable box, and then on the actual TV, you would like switch the channel up one. Do you know what I'm talking about? Am I alone here?
no, I totally
Uh,
remember what you're talking about actually. In fact, I remember the cable box that we had. Yeah.
yep.
Yep. We had a
So
very similar one.
yeah, so internet was kind of the just kind of supercharged the addiction, but there were other ways to try to find it too during
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah. We always did this thing and where we would stay at like Robbie's house, right? Like all of us kids in junior high, because like Robbie's dad had the magazines. Like
Hmm.
no one know the dad did, or if they did, we just didn't know where they were. And we'd always be like, let's stay at Robbie's house. His dad's got all the Playboys, right? Like that's how
Yep.
we'd like strategically stay at certain people's homes just so we could look at like naked pictures of women. So
Yep.
yeah. Okay. So how did this then perpetuate into further into your life?
Hmm. Yeah. So, eventually I went to college, was out on my own, fully, addicted basically to this. Um, I was single pretty much throughout most of my 20s. So I was in college by myself, had a computer, had the internet, had access to myself, or had access to it, had a lot of time by myself, was just fully into it. That really occurred throughout my 20s. Got out of college, uh, got a job, had my own apartment, same thing, had the internet, still was fully addicted, never was able to break free. And I'll say too, throughout this time, I mean, I'm really blessed. I've always had such an amazing group of close friends, and from probably middle of high school, I had a group of friends that we were, being open with each other about this and trying to encourage each other. So
Even at that
throughout,
age.
yeah. So I
Wow.
mean, again, I'm really blessed with some
Yeah.
just amazing friends I still have today. Um, and we were open with each other about it, which has just been huge. So that throughout high school, throughout college, throughout my 20s, I had friends that I was talking to about it. So it wasn't like, just no one knew about it, and I wasn't telling just anyone, obviously, but I always had a good group of friends to talk to about it. Um, so yeah, throughout my 20s, I ended up joining the Air Force. Um, that moved me down to the Carolinas. I'm from Minnesota originally. Met my wife, and I actually confessed to her before we got married, before I even proposed, because I knew I didn't want to hide it from her. So she knew about it. She's just been so supportive, so encouraging this whole time. But we got married. We set up filters on the computers and everything, and we would have kind of check-ins, regular check-ins. Um, but as is also typical, about a year, maybe year or two into marriage, I just started drifting back into it. The same patterns. When I had time alone, that's when that old desire would creep back up, and I would find ways around the filters to satisfy that desire, whether it's YouTube, Facebook. I would still get back into those old patterns.
So your wife was sounds like your wife was kind of an accountability partner in a way?
Yeah.
Wow.
Hmm. Yep.
That's amazing. Cause listen, man, I mean, the stories, and I'm sure you're the same, but working with men for the past 10 years, that conversation, number one, is terrifying if you
Yeah.
haven't had it. And number two, it could go one of a few different ways. And usually, I mean, women associate porn with, hey, am I not enough? Is this, why do you need that? Right. And at the same time, I think most of us as men, like we just view this as like, well, like this is pretty innocent, like it's not hurting anybody. In fact, maybe I'm doing her a favor because maybe I'm the high driver in the relationship. And if I do this, it kind of, gets me sort of satisfied until we get together again. Right. I did have one guest on here though. Her name is Melanie Studley. So it's one of the few females I've talked about this on the topic. And, we had a very, I would say, frank discussion around it because I was like, Melanie, like, tell me from a woman's perspective, because from a guy's perspective, that's kind of our perspective, right? Is that like
Right.
it's really kind of innocent. In fact, sometimes we're kind of doing you guys a favor because we're the high driver. She goes, no, yeah, I totally get that. She's like, but imagine it like this, okay? Imagine if your wife came to you and was like, hey, I just want to share with you, I've been searching photos on the internet of men without their shirts off who are like just ripped and just really good looking men. And they're like cleaning the house and, they're just like very soothing. And I'm like, how would you feel about that? And I'm like,
Right.
oh. And I was like, okay, all right. I'm jiving with you now. And literally the first thing that came up for me was, am I not enough? Like literally, like it wasn't the
Right.
jealousy of like, well, what are you seeing? Like, let me see it. Like, are these guys better looking than me or whatever else? It was almost like, well, what am I not doing that you need? Am I not enough? Like all these questions. And then suddenly we're put in the shoes of, I think it really boils down for the women. Am I not enough? Which is the number one deepest human fear, right?
Exactly. Yep.
But how quickly for the men who are listening to you now and they're like, man, I kind of really been wanting to have this conversation with my wife. Like, but they're terrified to do it.
Yeah.
So, how did you approach the topic? And then, how did you guys keep having positive discussions around it to where it didn't maybe turn into something horrible?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really hard question. I
Hmm.
mean, for me,
I don't ask easy ones, by the
well, no,
way.
that's a really good question. It's a hard one. So for me, with my well, she's my girlfriend at the time, but I proposed a couple of months after this. I mean, just kudos to her. She just had such a gracious, loving, supportive um, attitude about it and response. She really appreciated the honesty. Um, Granted, and I'll get into this, I had to reconfess years later, and that was really hard. Um, it takes a lot of courage. I don't know how else to say it. It's risky, but what's the alternative? The alternative is much riskier. So it takes a lot of courage. I mean,
So,
I
how
will.
did you have? Yeah, how'd you have the revisit conversation?
Right. So we got married. I started drifting back into it after a couple of years. We had our first daughter, um, and we ended up getting an iPad, to take photos and send videos and stuff like that. We didn't put a filter on that. So after a while, I started realizing, whoa, this is unfiltered access again. So I got hooked again, slipped fully back into porn. That went on for a few years. So what happened? So back when our first daughter was born, the doctors discovered cancer in my wife's uterus, and long story short, she ended up having a hysterectomy about a week after our daughter was born. So after a couple years, we decided to pursue adoption because we wanted to add to our family. So for anyone who's pursued adoption, all the paperwork and all the questions that you have to answer. And while we were filling out some of the paperwork, one of the questions was asking about any history of sexual addiction, and something like, have you had this, and when did you last struggle with it? And I read that, and again, this was a few years into struggling with the iPad. And when I read that question, my heart just started racing because I knew that I couldn't lie about it. You have to be honest with something like this. And I knew that I would have to be fully upfront about it. And not only that, but I would have to first tell my wife about it. So that was Super Bowl Sunday 2019, and I was like, okay, I got to get it over with. So we were supposed to go watch the Super Bowl with our next door neighbors that night, and I remember just sitting there looking at the TV while the game's going on, not noticing what's actually going on, because I'm just thinking about the conversation I'm about to have with my wife after this game is over, and the hurt and pain that I was going to cause um, to my wife and my best friend. So we come back home, and I reconfess, and I say, you know, this is what's been going on with the iPad for the past couple of years, and that caused a whole lot of hurt. I think the feeling of betrayal was a little bit higher, probably a lot higher actually, because it wasn't so much that I was doing it; it's that I wasn't being upfront about it, and so the feeling of betrayal, I think, was very big. Um, so again, it was not easy, and we revisited it a couple times, and we're still really kind of processing through it. But at that time, I was kind of recommitted to pursuing freedom at that point.
Well, I got to give you props, man. That is not a good conversation, or I shouldn't say it's not a good one. That's not a good feeling, knowing that that conversation is coming, right?
Hmm. It's
So,
painful.
and the other thing too, just a disclaimer, we're going to talk about now how to get around this. And the one thing that I want to acknowledge and appreciate you, man, is you're doing this for free. A lot of the gurus that I've had on the show, they've got a coaching program, or they have a course, or they have this, or they have that. You have, you're just doing this because you don't want men to experience the same pain and frustration that, and really maybe even the victim mentality of like, man, I just can't control this, right?
Hmm.
Not the victim mentality as in like we're identifying a man as a victim, but like where a man's like, I honestly don't have control over this, and
Right.
but I want to, right?
Right.
So what was the aha moment for you to be like, okay, this is a strategy that I think could work, and I'm going to implement it?
Hmm. Yeah. So really, really quick leading up to it, I ended up listening to a podcast about a week or two after reconfessing, and it was interviewing a guy who heads up a ministry called Pure Desire. Long story short, Pure Desire has small groups throughout the country. There was one here where I live. I ended up joining a Pure Desire group. I've been part of one for 2 years now, and there's no silver bullet to this strategy, but community, an accepting and open community, is, I think, just absolutely essential. So that's the first thing that I did. I joined a Pure Desire group. I've been part of one for 2 years. Just knowing that you're not alone, and it has been huge. So I saw a counselor um, specifically for this issue. And then also, I'm a learner, so I'm constantly just reading, listening to podcasts. Podcasts have been huge for me, um, just to learn and grow and try to find different strategies. So I had all these pieces in place, but I was just still finding that I was still struggling when I was in that place where that urge, that desire would come up. More often than not, I just felt like there was a huge roadblock, and I just couldn't have sustained victory. So eventually, throughout all the learning that I was doing and reading and podcasts, I came across this idea that I had never heard before, and it ended up being a complete game changer for me. And here's the idea. So, in order to stop an unwanted behavior, like watching porn, stopping the behavior is not the difficult part. The difficult part is what to do with the feeling you are left with when you don't do it. Okay. So again, stopping the action or behavior itself is not the hard part. The hard part is how to handle the intense feeling that you're left with when you don't do the behavior. Okay. So when I'm in that moment of feeling that strong urge to look at porn, that intense desire to go to that website and pull up my phone and look at porn, what happens if you just decide in that moment, well, I just won't do it. I just won't do that action. You know, why do I? decide just not to do it. I mean, this behavior has caused me so much shame and guilt and pain. It's hindered my spiritual life. It's stolen so much time. It's caused a huge amount of deep hurt to my wife. It's robbing me of the vision of the man that God wants me to be. You know, it's destroying so many good things. Why are we not able to just stop in that moment and not do that behavior? Well, what happens when you decide just not to look at porn in that moment? What are you left with? You're left with that intense feeling, that urge that was driving you to look at porn in the first place. You're left with that, it's just screaming at you. Okay, so if you decide in that moment, I'm just not going to look at porn, you know, does does that feeling just say, oh, okay, not this time, cool, all right, I'll go away now? No, that's not how feelings work, unfortunately. So if you decide, no, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to look at porn this time, I'm not going to do that behavior, that intense feeling stays right there with you, continuing to urge and scream its desire at you. And so this is what we're faced with when we choose not to give in. And for me, kind of realizing this, uh, I realized that for me, this was the main culprit. It was the chain that kept me locked in the struggle, was this feeling and not knowing how to deal with it. Okay? So for decades, I was focused on the behavior. I had never heard or considered before what's behind the behavior, and that the feeling is really the cause of it. And so you learn what to do with that feeling. At least this is what I did. When I learned what to do with the feeling, then I was able to stop the unwanted behavior. And that's when I finally started having victories and freedom that I had never experienced in 20 years.
You're hitting on something that's profound because you're exactly right. It's not, it's what do I do with this energy? What do I
Right.
do with this? It's so distracting. How do I get rid of it? Right. And I think, and I don't want to jump ahead, and I don't even know much about your steps, but in my own experience, it's replacement behavior,
Hmm.
right? It's like, what can I do instead of this? And when you're physically, emotionally, and mentally triggered like that, to dive into an urge that, it, by the way, is so powerful,
Yep.
hardwired into our physical DNA, mental DNA, to reproduce, to sow our seed, so to speak, right?
Hmm.
I mean, it's just there. It's part of who we are as human beings. However, what what can we replace, and how can we replace that behavior? So what did you find that really, really worked for you?
Hmm. Yep. So, well, yeah, what do you do with this
What do
feeling
you
when you
do? Yeah.
decide not to do it? Yeah.
Right.
So, what I did for years was basically try to resist it. Um, and anyone who's dealt with this struggle for a long time knows that simply trying to resist or fight back against it doesn't give you a winning track record. It didn't give me one. And there's a couple reasons for this. Just really quickly, I mean, the main reason is that it relies on willpower. And I don't know about you, Larry, but my willpower varies drastically based
Sure.
on the day,
Mhm.
based on how I'm feeling in that moment. So if I'm relying on my willpower to resist that urge, I'm toast. Um, so we don't want to give into it. We don't want to resist it or fight against it. So what do you do? So here's the other option that was the game changer for me. So imagine you're in that place where you're flooded with that urge to look at porn. So instead of giving into it, obviously we don't want to do, or trying to resist it, or even distract yourself, because eventually it's going to come back up. That's been my experience. So instead of doing those two things, what if instead you actually turn towards the feeling? What if you stop, you acknowledge that feeling, you acknowledge that the urge is there, and you just let it be there? So instead of trying not to feel that intense desire and push it away or fight against it, you actually turn towards it and you intentionally feel it. Okay. So Why in the world would you want to intentionally feel this highly uncomfortable, highly unpleasant feeling? Because that's how you let it flow through you rather than overtake you. And in my experience, after trying everything for over 20 years, this is the best way to help that feeling leave. So instead of trying to fight against it, distract yourself, or stuff it back down, that's how you enable it to flow through you. Okay.
So what you're saying is that that's the first step, is just to simply say, "Hey, I see you. I know you. I know you're there." It's kind of like I was at a speaking event this past week, and we talked about the things that we resist will persist, right? So it's
Right.
kind of like, "Hey, Dan, don't think of an," or you guys in the audience, don't think of an elephant. Whatever you do, don't think of an elephant. For the love of God, your life depends on it. Don't think of an elephant, right? You're like, okay, I'm not going to think about it. And then what happens is like this frustration, this tension just builds and builds to where, up to the point to where I think what you're saying is you just submit and you're like, you know what? I'm tired of fighting this. I'll just do it, get rid of the feeling, and then I can move on. So, but if you just sit there and say, no, the elephant's there. What's going on, elephant? I see you. The tusks, the big ears, trunk, what all, I see it. It's there. And that's right there alone, that feeling of being like, yeah, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think that there's a now what, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so the reason why that works is, so emotions and feelings, without getting too much on a rabbit trail, emotions and feelings are simply messengers. They have a message, they want to be heard. And I mean, just like a toddler screaming, if you just turn away and say, no, I don't want to hear it, and you fight back against it, you're going to get more resistance. So this concept of noticing and allowing the feeling, letting it flow through you, it's a bit ethereal, and it was really hard for me to grasp at first. So how do you actually do this? And that's what you said. That there's actually a very simple 3-step process that I used that makes it very tangible and practical. And we sort of alluded to it, but step one is basically, when you're in that moment where you notice that urge is there, here's the first step that I do. You stop, you take a breath, and you just literally say these words to yourself. I am feeling the strong urge to watch porn. That's it. You simply pause, you notice that the feeling is there, and you verbally acknowledge it. You don't, no anger or judgment about it. You just notice that it's there. And it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy, but when you do this, what happens is you step outside of the feeling, right? You're separating yourself from the feeling. It's like getting back in the driver's seat of yourself rather than the feeling overtaking you and driving you. And I'm always thinking of the movie Inside Out, those feelings like the anger guy, like, when he gets behind the controls and he's, pressing the buttons. When you stop and just literally say the words, I am noticing the strong feeling to watch porn, it's a shift that happens inside of you, and you go from being driven by the feeling to simply observing it.
You're
Okay.
witnessing it.
Exactly.
You're not
Yep.
judging it. You're not shaming it. You're not identifying, I am a bad, weak person for even feeling this urge right now. I'm just
Right.
witnessing it.
Exactly.
Yep. Which
Yep.
takes the energy away.
It
Not maybe
does.
not maybe not away, but it lowers the volume, right?
It takes the edge off.
Yeah.
It really does. Yep. It gives you a realization that I am not the feeling. You step
Right.
outside of it and you notice it as an observer.
I mean, the thing is it's a human thing, right? It's part of being a human being to have a high sexual desire. We were meant to reproduce. We were meant to have sex, and we were meant to release. It's a primal part of being flesh and being a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, as we've alluded and we've identified, not a healthy outlet to go do that, right? And if we can take that energy and like you said, identify it. Hey, I see you for what you are, it is what it is, not judging it. So then what's step two?
Mm-hmm. So you do this first step, you acknowledge the feeling. After you've done this, the second step, Immediately set a timer for 10 minutes. So for 10 minutes, you're just going to allow that intense feeling to be there. You're not going to give into it, but you're also not going to try to resist it or push it away or fight it off. You're just going to let it be there. You give it permission to be there and to scream its message at you. And so, without a doubt, this is not an enjoyable experience. It's uncomfortable, and the urge will continue to flood you and scream and yell at you. But it's okay because letting it be there and letting it deliver its message is the best way to help it leave. And eventually, it'll start to go away. So, you set the timer for 10 minutes, and then you simply I just go about my day or my night and do whatever I was going to do if I didn't have that urge. And so the question, why do you set the timer? So it's similar to a workout. So imagine going to a gym and you're working out with a trainer. Now you guys will have to imagine this. I know nothing about this. I have like zero muscle mass. But if you can, try to imagine going to a gym and the trainer says, "Okay, bench press, go." You'd probably be like, how much weight? How many reps? Right? So we need a defined goal to know when we've reached our target. That's what setting the timer does for you. So each time you notice that urge, you acknowledge it, you set a timer for 10 minutes and allow the urge to be there, you're completing one rep. And with each rep, you're getting better at this skill and you're building that muscle.
I love this. Let me pause for a second. I love the simplicity of this. And by the way, I love the gym reference. Like I'm a huge fitness buff. I love anything fitness. And you're right. You don't do any type of exercise indefinitely. You'll kill yourself. Right.
Right.
So this is a very simple tactic. And as you said, I would imagine the first rep is going to be hard. The
Yep.
second rep is going to be hard, right? You're creating a habit and a muscle, right? And over time, I imagine this 10 minutes is like, you know what? I don't feel the intensity as much as I used to. I know what's going to be present here. I know what's going to come up for me. I know this is going to be uncomfortable and I'm willing to sit with it, right? So that
Mhm.
I imagine that edge just gets sharper and sharper and stronger and stronger.
That's exactly right, and that's what gets so exciting, and you're exactly right. The first few times that I did this, it just felt so clunky. It felt wrong. It felt like it wasn't, you know, like, "What is this?" It's just weird. But, for me, after I did it, 4, 5, 6 times, that's when I could start to feel exactly like you said, the edge getting sharper. And so you do this. So step 1, acknowledge the urge. Step 2, set a timer for 10 minutes on your phone, computer, whatever, and go about your day. Step 3 is to count the rep somewhere. Okay, so keep a journal page, mark it, on your phone, get a jar and put, small rocks in or something. Just some way that you can count each rep that you've done so that you can see your progress and see the number of times that you've allowed this urge, that you've processed this feeling rather than rather than trying to or resist it or give into it. And it's like a reward system that you can see. Each of those reps that you count represents a time that you didn't give into an urge. The way that I see it is it represents a physical step that I took on this journey out of the struggle into the fresh air of freedom. Each of those reps is like a step you're taking. And seeing those reps is powerful. It feels good. And it gives you the desire to keep pressing on. And I'll say too, the amazing thing about this that I noticed is that as I got into this and I got 4, 5, 6 reps, instead of dreading those times that I was flooded with that urge and seeing that as a problem, I found myself actually welcoming those urges when they came because I knew that processing more and more of those urges and getting better at this skill was the path to freedom. I started seeing those urges as the stepping stones to journey into health and a better life. And that was an amazing realization for me. It just flipped the switch for me.
So that third step is really creating a visual of wins, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like getting on this, we've talked about fitness. It's kind of like, okay, like every time, let me log how much weight I'm pushing on bench. If I started out at 135 and I slowly start to see the progression of 140, 145, 160, 185, 225, all these things, you're like, wow, you look at that and you're like, the reps feel the same. Well, they maybe don't feel the same as far as like the heaviness, but like I can literally see a progression. I Everybody in the audience knows that I'm a big fan of 75 hard. I'm a big fan of 75 hard because it's tactics. It's real tactics that over time develop mental toughness, right? And I think what you're talking here is physical, mental, and even spiritual toughness, but being able to measure it in more of a cerebral and even visual way, right?
Exactly.
Um, let me ask one question. I don't know if you're prepared for it, but what about replacement behavior? I mean, it sounds like the 10 minutes is like replacement behavior. I'm going to sit with this for 10
Mhm.
minutes and then I'm going to log my win that's going to be mentally and emotionally and visually. Like I can see it, like you mentioned the rocks in the jar. But have you ever done anything else as far as what I've noticed is since I've been doing, I haven't looked at porn in a long time. But when I was getting away from it, what I would do, and I love, by the way, this take a breath, feel it, set a timer. Like I could see, like, man, I wish I would have known that when I was trying to do this, because what I would do is fight it, try to forget it, but then I would do something else. Like I'd be
Right.
like, I'm going to take this energy. I'm going to write a note to my wife. I'm going to take this energy and write a note to my kids. I'm going to take this energy and I'm going to send one of our, new dad edge hats to one of my guys who needs it. Right. Or I would go on social media for 10 minutes and create a live video of inspiration, something like that, to where I would take the urge and the energy and just replace it with something that would impact something positively. So have you ever done anything like that as far as just replacement behavior?
So I've literally done everything. And I love that. I actually love that strategy. So taking that energy and directing it somewhere else. Um, so I personally have tried everything, and I just never, for me personally, I mean, obviously that's something that worked for you. For me personally, I was never able to have a winning track record with anything that I tried. Some things would work every once in a while, but I just never was able to have a good success rate until I discovered this strategy. So for the guys listening, have a plan. If this doesn't resonate with you, you know, find something that does. Whatever works for you, do it. If it's not working for you, try something else.
Yep.
Um, but just for me, that everything I tried just didn't give me a winning track record until I discovered this.
I love, man, Dan, I love how simple this is. I really, really do. And the other thing too is I love the 3-step process. Everybody can remember 3 things. But if you look at this particular topic, I think one of the reasons we do not win is because we shame ourselves. We guilt
Mhm.
ourselves. We even shame ourselves for having the trigger. Like, oh,
Yeah,
I'm just terrible, right? But
yeah,
if you think about it, like I said, I love fitness. And I think one of the main themes in this show is know thyself, right? Be like, hey, man, like I'm a high desire person. And this is something that I would do a whole lot if I allowed myself to do it. Although I know it's not in my best interest. Like if you compare that to health, if you ate a Big Mac and a large order of fries every day, if you felt like it, long term, that's not good, right? It's not good for your health. It's not good for your mental health, emotional health, like all those things in it. But is to know thyself. Know thyself. So I get up at 4 a.m. every single day and I go to the gym. I'm in the gym by 4:40 every morning. And I know full well, I know myself for 2 minutes. I hate getting up that early for 2 minutes. And if I have barriers in place, I'm going to hit the snooze bar. And one of my barriers is if my workout partner isn't waiting for me, I know that that's a barrier. If I don't sleep in my gym clothes, that's a barrier. If I don't have all my supplements, my water bottle, like literally everything that I'm going to grab on my way out, that's a barrier. The shoes, the socks, the shorts, the shirt, everything is. So it's like make it easy on yourself because we never rise to any occasion and we never rise to like, well, when this desire hits, I'll fight it. We default to our systems. And
Yep.
we default to our training. And part of that is like, hey, I know myself and I know my weaknesses. So I need to have that system in place and not to judge that, right?
Right. And it's predictable. If I do this, if I don't do this, I know what my response will be. If my partner's not waiting for me, I know, you know, how I'm going to respond. I'm not going to get out of bed. Same with this struggle. It's fairly predictable, right? If you think about, for the guys listening, if you think about the last 5 times that you've looked at porn, think about the situation you were in. My guess is it's going to be, you could have predicted it in advance. It's probably the same situation over and over. So you're exactly right. Know when you're going to be triggered and have a plan in place.
I love it, man. I want to make sure that everybody can find you have a guide out there, which I think is pretty cool. And I went to your website. It is probably the simplest website on the planet.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? And here's the guide. Like,
Yeah.
like literally.
It's because I
And
don't know how to do it any other way. So
yeah, I love it, man. And you're the whole 3-step process, but I want to make sure everyone knows where they can find this.
yeah, so I wrote a guide just explaining this, and it's found at newpaths.me.
Newpaths.me. We have guys, we'll have in the show notes, not to worry. Not to worry. So, and by the way, the other thing I want to share too, we didn't hit on it deeply, but I want to make sure that we nail it right here. You said something about community. We have a community called Dad Edge Alliance, and that's our brotherhood. That's where we have nearly 600 men now who come and do life together. We optimize what we call the 5 dimensions of being a husband, father, and man. And that is mastering your finances, optimizing physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, creating a legendary marriage, epic connection with your kids, and being a leader. And by the way, porn is something that we talk about very openly. We have guys who are in accountability groups around this. So I know the power of community, and I know the power of what we call joyful accountability. And by the way, we don't shame or guilt or yell at men or get in their face when they have a slip up. We're like, hey, you slipped up. Okay, let's pivot. Like, how might we put in maybe more boundaries or more tactics, or what do we do here, right? To keep each other, to hold ourselves to a higher level. But you mentioned community, and I want to make sure what did community do for you? And besides, you already said, I didn't feel alone. But what did community really do for you in this whole process?
Yeah, I mean, with this struggle, because it's so rarely opened about or talked about openly, I should say, you tend to feel like no one else struggles with it. And that just generates a lot of shame, like, what's wrong with me? When it's just crazy. I mean, statistically, I mean, you can find this so easily. Like, I mean, you said it. I mean, almost any stat you find, basically more than half of the guys you interact with, and that's being generous, struggle with this. So the community piece, sort of, some things take the edge off of this struggle. Like we talked about, community is one of those things. It just gives you a platform to stand on, I feel like. So community is just absolutely, I think, foundational for really finding sustained freedom from this.
I got to tell you, man, you're doing really good work in the world. You really are. And the funny thing is, man, I've had some amazing guests on this show. Just share with the guys real quick, kind of a interesting story, how we even got connected. I thought what you did, man, was so courageous. Number one, this topic is hard. Number one, to talk
Yeah.
about. And I'm talking about, it's hard to talk about even at like a surface level. Oh, let's talk about porn. But I ain't going to tell you about my habits with it, but we can talk about it.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about you talking about this topic is that not only are we talking about the topic, but you're really putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, after struggling with this for 20 years, and just doing a whole lot of work, and then eventually discovering this strategy that just really helped me, not only in this area, but it just spilled over into a lot of other areas too that were just so helpful. I just felt, I feel morally obligated to try to share this with other guys, because sort of like you mentioned, I wish someone had told me about this 20 years ago. So I think I was listening to your podcast one day, and I think at the end they shared your email address, and it's like, oh, Larry's got a lot of guys that could potentially benefit from this. And so I just cold emailed you, and we got this set up to speak. So a huge admiration for you for being willing to speak with this Joe Schmo about this topic.
Well, you're not a Joe Schmo. You are a lighthouse. You really are. And whether you feel that way now or not, men truly need to hear this message. And I'll tell you, yes, I get a lot of email requests, and a lot of it comes from a very self-serving place, I think, when it comes to like, hey man, like I want to come on your show, right? I got this program, it's $2,000, like it changed men's lives, right? And so I get a lot of emails about that stuff. And I would say, I mean, I'm very picky about who I have on this podcast because I hold our audience in high regard. But when I saw the topic, immediately I perked up. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's talk about this topic. And then I went to your website and I was like, there's no program around this. I don't see anything where a man can give a credit card. Like this guy, like it looks like to me, he is literally doing this because he struggled with it and he wants to create a ripple effect in the world to just help other men out of the kindness of his heart. And that's where this platform is as well, is to help men create legendary lives, right? And this is one of the ways to do it, because you're right. It steals our joy. It steals our time. It pulls us away from God. If you're a spiritual person, it pulls you away from your wife, whether you like to think about it or not. Think if you took that energy and you directed that towards her, what would that look like? Right? So I give you mad props, man. And I love what you're doing in the world.
Thanks a lot, Larry. You too.
Awesome, man. Well, gentlemen, hey, for this show, we got you covered. You're not going to have to worry about memorizing any show notes or anything like that. Just go to gooddadproject.com/Thursday 265. Again, gooddadproject.com/Thursday 265 for this particular show. We'll have all kinds of resources in there. Number one is 21 Days to an Extraordinary Marriage. That's a free resource. Look, we want to go out there, and I'm sure Dan has the same feeling. We want to go out there and we want to change marriages for the good, right? So that's number one. I'll also have a link in there for today's sponsor, which I think is very appropriate for today's show, which is Bark. Bark is the app that works with our kids' devices that we can put on our phones, that we can monitor anything that they're maybe saying over text messaging, or maybe those internet searches, right? The internet searches. I've already had to have that conversation with my 15-year-old. And it was a joyful conversation. So we'll have a link in there for Bark as well if you want to sign up for their subscription. My life would not be the same without Bark. I'm just telling you right now. So Dan, thanks again for coming on, my friend. Really enjoyed it.
I did too. Thanks a lot, Larry.
You got it. Gentlemen, go out and live legendary. Take care.